everybody. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you, June and Shelf Life, for just bringing us all together in this evening. And to Jeremy, whom I've known for a very long time. Before I begin, I just want to say that as an immigrant settler of South Asian, Iranian, and Irish descent, I'm immensely grateful to be able to call Mohkinstsis, also known as Calgary, my home, after moving from the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, also known as Vancouver, a couple of months ago. People of Calgary are very kind and very sweet, so thank you. I'm constantly in admiration of the generosity of Indigenous teachings, some of which I am currently benefiting from and have long benefited from. For example, I'm reading Hungry Listening by Dylan Robinson right now, which is really helping me think through sound studies and sound in literature for my PhD in progress at the University of Calgary. Yeah. And it is such a joy to be here with Jeremy, whom I've known from since before I published my first book, Port of Being. You know, Jeremy gave me one of my first fiction and poetry publications in the journal that he used to call Dreamland, that he used to run, called Dreamland. And I can say he's made a lot of dreams possible for me just by being such a cool person and always willing to help, so hospitable, always has the best taste in music. And yeah, I'm just so happy to be able to share this space with Jeremy for my first Calgary reading. And yeah, I will read a couple of poems from Port of Being. And then I will pass it over to Jeremy and we'll maybe have a Q&A after. This one is called Conspiracy of Love, and it's inspired by Anne Michaels, who writes, "You loved like a conspirator against everything that has power to defeat us." Conspiracy of Love. The problem with trying to one-up yourself is not that you might die by your own hands, but that you'll be able to justify why without feeling anything. When you're in withdrawal, alone in your bed, the salt from the sweat pressed on the mattress was testimony to what you allowed. Quote, "I am Satan because I deal in language," unquote. The next day, you'd stop shaking. You went to work secular and clean. There were no other addicts and you didn't speak. You know that lies look beautiful, unified, all parts clicking together, lighting up your eyes. Their old technology made new, sleek and gleaming, in crevices, like fog rolling around Renfrew. And you're awake today to see it, because you've been brave. You've noticed your friend has listened and told you very boring things, not dismissed them as errands. This is a task you will have to do soon enough, remembering all the ways your mind moved, to write yourself into a poem you want to call Conspiracy of Love. When a guy from Tinder said hi to you in school, it didn't strike you that he might know you from the internet. You didn't remember who he was, not even when he called you by your fake name. All you thought was, quote, "I can't do this again. I want to be clean. I want to be Shazia," end quote. If you end this poem here, it might make sense, but we both know this kind of work is a cult. So you have to ask me, how do you want to finish this poem? You have to leave it there. That way, at least it's not about you anymore. Thank you, Jeremy. I always used to apologize before reading that poem because it's so intense. But I think now that we're reading together and because your book is equally intense, I will take the liberty. I'll read one more poem. This one is called Secret Playground. I didn't tell you of the hands that led the internet cable into the sea. They were brown, or that I was thinking of rows of royal blue binders in a hospital in Afghanistan. Records of amputations from drone strikes. I saw all this on TV, as in my laptop, torrents, Netflix. It doesn't make sense to ask if words will ever stop failing me, but I want to ask it. What does it take for a 3-year-old who lived on M&Ms and barely escaped the Gulf War to call the first part of her life simulacra? I didn't tell you because I still don't believe it. In Toronto, I read a poem about another part of my life, one I still find hard to believe when I'm not with myself. A stranger asked me afterwards, "Are you really clean though?" I was. I hadn't done any drugs. I couldn't believe his guts, but I did, because I smiled and nodded as if I'd just signed him a check. Then I cupped my phone with both hands and I bowed my head as if to say, someone is calling me and I have to go, as if in fear, as if in thanks. Thank you all for listening, and thank you so much for being here tonight. Thank you for the emojis. Now I want to present my very dear friend, Jeremy Stewart. Jeremy is the author of Flood Basement and Hidden City, winner of the Robert Kroetsch Award for Innovative Poetry. He's the founding artistic director of Casse-Tête, a festival of experimental music, and he's also the recipient of the inaugural Barbara Pentland Award. He once dropped a piano off a building, and I can testify to this. This is indeed true. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you, Shazia. Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you very much to June and Shelf Life for hosting. And I have a lot more people to thank who are not here, but I'll save that and I'll read you something. I'll actually speak a little bit about Shazia. It's been such a privilege to have your involvement with this text and your enthusiasm for it. Of course, there's some beautiful words of yours on the back of this that I appreciate very much, on the back of the book right down here. And yeah, you know, it was wonderful to be able to publish your work in Dreamland. Actually, I don't know if I've ever told you how I found you to ask you to be part of that. I was combing everything on Ditch. If anyone here remembers Ditch, the poetry that matters, and the absolute best stuff that was on Ditch, I solicited those writers to send me something for Dreamland. So that was your stuff as well. And I actually remember when Conspiracy of Love was published, I believe first on the Train blog, if I remember right. And actually it was as I recall, the only thing that anybody was talking about on Twitter for quite some time, because it is so powerful. So I'm glad that you read that. So this book has been kind of a long time coming. I'll just speak about it a little tiny bit. It was a version of this was my MA at the University of Northern British Columbia, which I defended in 2010. And it had a lot of literary theory and stuff in it, which gradually made its way out over the decade of rejections that this book drew. And I feel so pleased to have found a home for it at the University of Calgary Press, who have been wonderfully supportive and just ideal to work with in so many ways, and that I can share this book with you all now. So in order to avoid just being super extremely boring by carrying on and on, I think I will read something from it now. So this is, of course, this book is about a young man, a heavy metal musician, a high schooler, teenager guy, who has a confrontation with a school administrator one day, which turns into a confrontation with the police, and which turns into committal to the psychiatric intensive care unit at the Prince George Regional Hospital. And I wanted to read a part of this that is particularly sort of violent and climactic. And I hope that, so just brace yourselves. But I think that a lot of the story is in here, because a lot of what's important to me about this book, and perhaps will be important to you as well, if you read it, will be the conflict of voices and the conflict of accounts that takes place, because the story is told through many voices and lenses, and they certainly don't agree. And it does fall to the reader to make their version of the book sort of in the reading. And I think that some of the tensions will come across here, even though it is in the voice of the main character, whose name is John. Glasses off, I turned to face the open door, and he said, Hey, John, you ever gone 10 rounds with a jalapeno? It sprayed pepper spray into my eyes. There was a hiss. It went in my eyes and started hurting bad, fast. I won't give them the satisfaction of hearing me cry out, I thought. I couldn't open my eyes. I squirmed and fell back and tried to rub my eyes, but my hands were cuffed behind my back. I made a little yelp. My eyes were burning and stinging, and the hurting was becoming more and more intense until I thought it would not become more intense, but I was wrong. And I tried to open my eyes, but they couldn't. And I got so scared, and sticky water started to gush and leak out of my eyes, all over my face, and my hair stuck to it. Voices on the radio asking unintelligible questions. I writhed in my seat in the back of the car. My forehead felt flat where I had smashed it into the window. There was an ache there. Eyes were burning and itching, and I tried to reach up, but my hands were cuffed behind my back. I reached to try to rub my eyes, rubbed them with my knees. The two silent men drove me along. I mapped where we were by the turns I felt the car take. I could see the map lines, could not make the map work, and could not decide if turns were left and right by the light as it went in and out of my eyelids, and the falling back and forth across the seat as the momentum of the car changed. And I whined and cried because it stung, and I couldn't see, and I was afraid because the car kept moving and stopping, and no one said anything except the crackling radio. Over. The thrum of the motor. There came a stop longer than the others. The car was turned off. There were door thumps and the weight in the vehicle changed. I tried to sneak a glance, but there was no hope. My door opened and the cold hit me in the face. I was pulled out with my crying, draining eyes sticking the hair to my face, and I was pulled along, dragging my feet in the parking lot gravel, dragged and pulled into order by the rough hands of the buzz cut man, the crew cut headed, silent, angry men. And I was pulled along and pushed into the sweaty, warm air that struck me with rancid tepidity, the smell of sick people and medicine. Disembodied voices floated on the air that hurried past my hair in the sticky halls of the bad smelling place where I was but could not see. I was turned according to where I was supposed to walk and pushed along. I kept trying to see, but it hurt to open my eyes, so I would have to stop before I could try again. Then I was stopped. I came into a room and I could open my eye, a small crack. There was off-white that used to be white and an orange chair. Immediately it was blurred away. All of it was blurred because my glasses were off. On my hand, I could feel the orange chair that had crisscrossing fabric that was coarse. My hands were in metal links behind my back where they could cause no one any more trouble for now. The door was closed and I heard the men sit down across from me on coarse chairs. The metal frame of the chair was cold and smooth. I felt it through the rip in the knee of my jeans. I was sitting. The pain in my eyes was present, but lesser. Outside the door came a muffled sound, walking past every so often until I heard a sound that made me laugh inside, but only inside, the sound of my thoughts. My eyes were beginning to die down unless I tried to open them. The inside of my eyes looked black and red with some other patterns emerging. My eyelids were beginning to become stuck close together. Oh my God, is that an OD? No, a suicide attempt. Oh my God. I had to laugh inside at these poor women, these muffled nurses through the glass, to whom I was a shock. But it was not a suicide attempt. They were misguided. They were misguided in the extreme. I didn't do this to myself. I didn't. I put a belt around my neck and I tied the leather belt, the Italian hand-tooled leather belt, with its little flowers and painted birds, its tiny menagerie. I started to tie it to the rail of the stairs in the hall by the upstairs gym at the school, and I looked stupidly at the concrete wall by myself in a rare moment of peace. But then I decided that this was fucking stupid and that I can't let them win, and this is nothing to kill myself over because they can't kill me with my own hands. And all the voices and the moments came pouring over me in buckets, and my sister was there, blue open eyes, and she was very small. And the people I suddenly remembered were smiling at me because they loved me. And my grandmother never stopped believing I was perfect, no matter what I ever did, and she smiled. And the schoolwoman came rushing up to me with her short white hair, and her eyes were beady, wide, and empty, and she made her ungainly bound, and she screamed at my face, "We're only trying to help you!" And I screamed at her, and my eyes became hot with anger and probably turned red like cigarette cherries in their black skull hollows. And I screamed, "Get the fuck away from me!" And her face dropped. It changed so fast and she ran away. Now it is quiet and I hear the nurse and I open my eyes and it stings bad. I stood up and moved away. I never tried to kill myself. But I stay put while the nurse enters. She says, name, and I say, John Stevenson, and my voice is a gray, raspy croak, and I scare myself. She says, are you carrying any ID? And I say, no. And she says, why not? And I say, because I'm 15. And she says, nothing. But I hear the pen scratching against the paper that she holds against the clipboard against her breasts. And she asks questions about my mother and my mother's name and about my size and my medical needs. And I say, I'd like an eye wash, but none ever comes. The nurse leaves. I can open my eyes a little bit and the pain is less and my face is streaked with large sticky tears and the cop is looking at me like he could just puke. And the other one is a wash. He can't see me at all. He is asleep on his feet and he is blonde. And this is what I can see without my glasses. But the dark one says nothing pointedly. So I ask him, can I help you? And he thinks for a long time about my question. He says, can you help me? Can you help me? Do you think this is a fucking fast food restaurant? You're gonna get me a fucking cheeseburger? I missed my fucking lunch break because of you, kid. You shut the fuck up. So I shut the fuck up. And I waited in the small little room across from the two cops. The light one is Larry and the dark one is Mo. Where's Curly? Wait, I must be Curly. My hair is stuck to my face and it is black. My doctor came in. He said, well, you look like you've had a bit of a dust up. I agreed, imagining how I looked. I hear you've had a suicide attempt. You can sign yourself over to us here, agree to have yourself committed, and you won't have to go downtown with these gentlemen. What do you think? They took off the cuffs so I could sign. I signed. I kind of laughed and told him, it's been that kind of day, might as well sign. But he didn't laugh, seemed afraid of the laugh. Good, well, have a good rest. Let me know if there's anything you need. A nurse came and led me along the halls to an elevator where I stared straight in front of me. There were fluorescent lights and sick people and friends of sick people and people in green suits and people in orange suits carrying clipboards and paper. All these sights passed by me with a fuzzy halo because my glasses were gone, Lord knows where, and a disembodied voice naming people's names and telling them where they were needed was appearing and disappearing all around us. I could see everything badly, and my eyes felt hot and sticky, but my face was dry and tight with dried tears. Behind me were angry cops. They said nothing. When the elevator arrived, I got out with the leading nurse and the following cops to a room with a big pale orange door with a narrow reinforced glass window high up on it, after a little room where there were 4 black and white televisions and a silver microphone. The room with the pale orange door was where I was led. She gave me thin green pajamas. I just stood there holding them, not knowing, but then I asked for privacy and the cops grudgingly left the room. I pulled off my torn jeans and my white long johns and my wool socks and my gray wool women's coat and my black t-shirt, which all fell to the floor with a sigh. And I put on the cold green PJs, and through the open door, the dark cop called out, "Hey, John, hope you're not trying to hang yourself with your underwear." But he knew I wasn't. They said their goodbyes, and there was a long pause while I considered my surroundings. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and made a white pallor. There was smooth, pale blue, sparkly concrete for walls, except for a broad stripe of smooth, deep red, sparkly concrete. There was a slab that was part of the wall and the floor that raised up like a bed, and it had a side corner slab like a bedside table. There was a black box with a video camera eye in the top left corner, and on the right was a pale orange door with a small, narrow window onto the back hall, high up on it. In the ceiling was a metal grill, and a fan was blowing evenly behind it. And the lights. I sat down. The cold of the stone cut through the rear of the thin green pajamas. Everyone was gone for now. No glasses, no watch. I imagined the rows of people in the halls who were watching me when the cops carried me out of the school. And I couldn't see them without my glasses, but I could see they were staring, and they were silent. And there was only the sounds of the radios and the cops' belts and the shoes squeaking against the polished school floor and the handcuffs that cut my wrists behind my back. And every door we came up to, I smashed my face on it, and I smashed it again until we came to the front. And I decided not to. And I told the cop, I said, "I'm calm now." And he said, "Shut the fuck up." And we went out into the snow and the cold, and they pushed me against the police car, and they emptied my pockets into the snow, and my glasses were gone. Back in the hall where they knocked me on my face in the hall, where the principals curdled around trying to contain the damage, and the cops felt my body all over, and they grabbed and squeezed my testicles very hard through my pants and made tears in my eyes. And I waited, and they pushed me into the car and pepper sprayed me in the eyes. And I realized that since that was only lunch, it couldn't now be later Then 2 p.m. I sighed and leaned back against the wall. And that was what I wanted to read you folks tonight. Thank you very much. And now I have the idea that we're going to open it up into a bit of a conversation. So I think that I'd love to hear from folks in the chat, and Shazia, that you had some thoughts also to share, which I would love to hear.
Yeah, first of all, Jeremy, your reading was so evocative. There's a rhythm to the way that you write, and I felt like it was just so easy to listen to you and to get caught in the story. So really nicely done. When we were talking before the event started, you said that people had really been challenged by the fictionality of this book. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So I have definitely had people ask me some questions so far that they wanted me to in some way settle their sense of what parts of this text are memoir-like, if any, I suppose you could say, or what parts are very fictional. And so, I'm happy to entertain those kind of questions. But I think more than anything, what I really want to do is lay traps for people a bit, because I want them to feel tempted by some of the things like the photographs, like certain kinds of granular details, to think that everything is totally factual, but it is most definitely not. And hence the disclaimer, of course, at the beginning of the book, that this is a work of fiction. It's not just pro forma, it really is a work of fiction. So why do I want them to be tempted and trapped? And it's really because the different kinds of language in the text, whether that's the character's narration, like John's narration, or his friend Simon's account of his story, or psychiatric records written by the psychologist at the hospital, because they contradict each other, I really want the reader to come to their own conclusions about what's true and what's not true in the story. And then the relationship to quote unquote reality is something altogether more difficult. Yeah. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and if I can continue just a little bit, how did you come to plotting this? I'd imagine that there's this entire storyline that's John's voice, and then the psychiatric records that are another storylines. How did you weave all of that together? Because it seems like you've done such a good job of making it look like it's docu-poetic, this approach of the photograph with the script and lots of these forms, just making something very realistic, as if it's a testimony in some sense. So
yeah, thank you very kindly. So I think that it's partly an effect of just being arranged as it is, that the seams sort of cover themselves in a way, because especially the photos are often totally unmoored from the context that they were produced in, because of course they're real photos, and they are photos of people that I knew in high school and so on. But then I want if I in the composition process, I would have a block of text, and I would I had a selection of photos that I had chosen because their aesthetics appealed to me, or because there was something that I thought this is going to feed well into the story that I want to tell. And so inserting those, they really found their own place, because a lot of that was just calculated in terms of how much power can I, or apparent explanatory power, can I squeeze out of the photos. So that was one thought. But to answer more directly with respect to plotting, some of this material, there were a lot of redundancies in the different kinds of registers. So the friend's narration of the story, or and I should say, some of the psychiatric records may bear certain resemblances to real psychiatric records that could count as a found text that's important for this book. But then how those were, and actually, just as an aside, I did learn that one's own psychiatric records are the patient owns the copyright to those in Canada. So if anyone's thinking about these kind of things, that was something I was amazed to discover. But with respect to those, finding which versions of the narrative had the best bits sort of gave me a lot structurally, and then just having a feeling that I wanted there to be a rhythm in terms of breaking it up with poetry, and when it was going to be important to know certain things about John, to see John happy in certain moments and create contrasts, and just trying to exploit what power might be there in the found materials.
Anyone else have any questions for Jeremy? We'd love to chat with you. You're welcome to turn on your mics and cameras or post a question in the chat. It's so nice to see other writers here too. Hi, Greg.
I have a question. Hi, Jeremy.
Yeah.
Nice
Hi, Greg.
in kind of person. I loved reading your book, and I was just wondering if there's so many different moving parts in it, and I was wondering if there was one of those components that came first. Did you start off with poetry? Did you start off with the prose? Were you like where did this build from? Is kind of what I wanted to know.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And Greg, if I may also thank you for your contribution of words to this, and being such a generous early reader of it. So the first thing that actually came chronologically was a failed attempt to write it as a straightforward prose narrative. And I have a complete prose narrative version of this text, with one voice and one perspective. That was a total failure that I actually started. I think I started that in like 2002, and having that and seeing the things that weren't working was just tremendously generative for this. The idea that there would be different parts, the poetry actually came quite late. The first thing that got in terms of the chronology of actually creating this was actually the piece that I just read, because I wanted to feel like I could deliver that, and it seemed like it was a violent and conflictual kind of scene, and I've never felt that confident with handling prose narrative, and so I wanted that to feel like it worked, and then I could believe that I could create something that was better than the botched first version. Yeah, but the different sort of registers and stuff, it occurred to me, the kinds of voices that could be important, and the sort of different registers of truth that they might have access to. And so that conflict was really important compositionally then as well.
Thanks for that. I really enjoyed how there were so many conflicting voices, and there was so much contradiction in it, but I thought that made for a really well-rounded and enjoyable, good time.
Thank you, Greg. Cheers. Oh, I see. Oh, pardon me, Shazia, because I think I'm usurping your role here, but there is I saw a comment from Amanda in the chat. Can I elaborate on found text in the context of records? Sure. So there may indeed be, I may indeed have some actual psychiatric records of my very own that speak about me personally. And it would be impossible for anyone to ever tell how much of that, if any, may actually exist in this text. So certainly some of the language that one finds on intake forms is 100% genuine, and like actually there's some language in one of the poetry sections. This was something that my lovely editor Naomi K. Lewis, who was so wonderful to work with, flagged as just, hey, this is some kind of bad writing. She didn't put it that way, but she did draw attention to this one section that was like a bit of a form, and say this language is not very good. And I'll just find it here. It is also my opinion that, underline, John Stevenson requires medical treatment in a facility and care, supervision, and control in a facility for the person's own protection or for the protection of others, brackets, Mental Health Act. So those lines are actually from if a person, at least in 1997, signed to agree to their own committal, that really is there. So so there definitely are some pieces, but I really do leave it to the reader, I hope, as much as possible, to decide just how fraudulent the psychologist's voice is. Yeah. So I hope that answers the question as evasively as I can get away with. Gotcha.
And Jeremy, if I can intrude again, why did you choose this sort of approach to this docupoetic approach that looks factual but is fictional? Like, what was it about that? Because sometimes, when I'm writing my own stuff, I feel like in order to get to the truth, I have to actually have this persona, because I can't just say it straightforwardly sometimes. But this seems to be a reversal.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, so it's really, it really does have to do with staging the conflict between the different accounts. I crashed. Am I back? Am I back? Are we here?
You're back.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you. So the sense that there is a conflict between the different voices in the book is really important, but the nature of the conflict is really important, because I think that a person, if the language of mental health has been, if you've experienced it being applied to yourself, if a person has, it can be tremendously overpowering, and a diagnosis can start to drown out your sense of yourself. And I wanted to be able to ask questions like, what is it that makes that language so compelling? And when we hear mortal people like a psychologist wield it, it comes with a certain kind of authority that seems to supplement their authority. And I wanted to know about the nature of that, and we think about the different kinds of power that languages might have, or that language might have in an account of a person. Like if someone has called you a loser a lot of times, especially if it's someone that you care about, it can really, in a down moment, you might find yourself saying to yourself, "Oh, I am a loser, aren't I?" And it's like, what does that term even mean? What does it really mean? What's behind that? So wanting the reader to construct the story, to return to your question more directly, for me, that has to do with, I want to maintain the conflict, because like I was telling Greg, when in the original attempt at this, when it was very unified, it's a completely different story. It's a completely different experience and idea. Everything's filtered through one sort of master perspective it's just very different to try to represent the conflict. So I guess that was really what I wanted to do, is to allow that conflict to sort of stand, because if I just give John's own experience and opinion of it all, we learn to trust him or to not trust him, and we see him wrestle with things and sort of make up his own mind. But I really want, I've had the great pleasure and privilege of talking to a few people who really took the psychologist's narrative at face value, and then had to try to square that with how the text, I think it's pretty clear that its sympathies are with John, and and we expect that for a main character. But then, so they I guess that process stays suspended for them to some degree. Yeah.
Go ahead, Greg.
Thanks. I was just wondering, because you had mentioned that this book has been with you for a long time, and there's been multiple drafts of it. Has, like, in the process of writing this, has your interaction or your understanding of institutions changed in any way? And that could be mental health institutions or other institutions. I'm just wondering, because it does sort of engage with this idea of not the facelessness of institutions, but like the heartlessness that can exist in places like that. But has that changed over time? Are things getting better, or have you had any experiences that have pushed you in one direction or another with regard to institutions?
Yeah, I enjoy a pretty comfortable middle-class existence at this point in my life, as comfortable as it can kind of be, I think, in Metro Vancouver, and folks might know what I'm thinking of in particular. But Actually, and like I was, okay, so I'm a PhD student, and I've spent pretty much all my life in one way or another institutionalized, I could say, at least in terms of educational institutions. And I've been on both sides of that as well, like teaching and so on. And yeah, I would say that my relationship to institutions has changed quite a bit. I don't think that I have particularly any more faith in them than I had as a young person, because it's really, I do agree with your assessment that institutions appear heartless in my text. And actually, this was something that I was enjoying the other day. So so this is my third book, and my other two books, both poetry collections. I was rereading them all because I was planning for some events, and I was noticing, of all the disparities that there are between these texts, one thing that I could say about this person who wrote them over the course of well over a decade, always really didn't like the police. So that I can, that stays consistent. But I actually, in the course of my PhD studies, I've had a few opportunities to work with Terry Eagleton, which has been really awesome. And Terry Eagleton, anyone who doesn't know, of course, is a Marxist and a Catholic literary theorist, and fascinating, generous, lovely man, brilliant guy. And in our first meeting, I think just about the first thing that he said, I had written 1,000 words that I'd showed him about Derrida, and I didn't think that it was particularly personal or anything, but he's like, there's a strong anti-authoritarian streak in this work. Would you care to speak to that? It's like, man, is it really, do I show my hand at totally? And that is something, I continue to sort of think, if there's anything good about institutions, it's good people working against them. But they do seem to be a kind of necessary evil because of the scale of our society and how things are done. I'm not sure. They're necessary in the sense that we aren't about to not have them all. So that means that people have to survive them somehow. And that is something that I hope I can contribute to in a subversive way. But it's also been my privilege to hugely over-answer your question. I've been asked, because I had dropped out of high school, and sometimes teachers in the alternate ed system in the school that I went to have said, Jeremy Stewart, will you come in and speak to classes about your experience of doing that? I said, absolutely. And I've gotten to do this a couple times. And what I say to secondary students who are thinking about dropping out is, if you absolutely can't stick with it and just do it, dropping out will not be the end of the world, will not be the end of your life. It is not that big of a deal. But if you can stick with it, if you can stand to do it at all, save yourself a lot of trouble and just do it and get it over with. So that's sort of the way I think you could extend that sentiment to institutions in general. It's like, just survive, don't believe in it, don't have faith in it, do what you have to do to get through it and return to life on your terms. Thank you. Well, I see there's a very productive comment from Nikki, which I also quite endorse in the chat.
I have a question. My video isn't on, but it's Lorinda speaking here. Hold on, I'll try and start my video. Hi, Jeremy.
Lorinda.
I've known Jeremy since the events in the book. So, and my picture may be in here. Anyways, very, very cool read. I know I've talked to you extensively about it already, as a lot of these events are hit home for me as well. And so as I'm reading it poetically and fictionally, it hits me straight in the heart. So some real specifics, including this picture right here. And the next picture here of the, where is it? Of the camera in the corner. Both of those pictures, I was in that room myself and in the same hospital. And so it was really, really, this book really hits me very, very, very specifically. it's kind of emotional, just me actually just kind of speaking to you about this. And it, I think out of all of the people, I already said this to you, Jeremy, but out of all the people that'll ever read it, I think that for me, it was just really, really, really extra special. And it's almost a memoir, like for me, and it's and I have to read the poetic parts again, because there's so much in those parts to take in, that I think it'll have to be read numerous times. But anyways, yeah, just really, really wanted to thank you. It's just such a beautiful, beautiful read. Like, it's wonderful. I have tears right now. And it's also just really nice to see you again after all those years. And anyway, so my question was, since you were saying that you started kind of writing this in 2004, did you say?
2002.
2002.
Yeah.
Okay. So I see that your other book, with the flooded basement, I didn't read that. I wasn't aware of it because you and I just kind of got into contact within the last couple of years. But the how much of the flooded, because this speaks about your flooded basement, like the room that you're in. So how much of that book is sort of, since you, because it's written, it says 2009, I just looked it up. So is there significance with this book and that book, and the time that you wrote it? Or because you said that you wrote this one and it kind of was like you wrote it prose-like, and then it kind of paused and then you picked it up again. So I'm kind of wondering the timeline on all that stuff.
Sure. And let me just begin by thanking you for all our conversations about this book. I'm very, very to have it read and valued in that deep way, I think is what everyone who writes a book really hopes will happen. And certainly that's true for me. So thank you very much for that, Lorinda. And also very gracious of you to possibly allow a picture, possibly of you to be used. And really, I think enriches it. So to answer your question, my writing was mainly confined to writing heavy metal lyrics until I first went to the College of New Caledonia, which was like, basically I dropped out of school and I almost immediately applied to go to CNC because I thought maybe I could get a student loan. And that turned out to be true. But I had done stuff like I went with my buddy and tried to move to Edmonton with him and start a metal band. And I ended up sleeping in a parking lot of an apartment building on Jasper Ave, and like really not a good experience. And it's like phone my mom in tears and like, give me a Greyhound ticket, Mom. Anyway, so I ended up at CNC basically because at the College of New Caledonia because I needed to do something and I couldn't figure out what to do. And that was when I discovered the poetry of Barry McKinnon, who I think some folks here will know his writing. And of course, that was the first time that I discovered writing that was really about Prince George, and it just completely transformed and blew my mind. And I started trying to write poems, and then I was in classes that Barry taught. And the jump from heavy metal lyrics to poetry for the page was not huge, but then it was in creative writing classes with Stan Chung, who some of the folks here will know, that I first really started to write prose, and I felt like I had no facility for it at all. And that was when I started attempting to write what would eventually become In Singing. And there's really no trace of that attempt in the ultimate book. But the poems that I was writing for Barry, I actually, when I started at UNBC, where I transferred to University of Northern British Columbia, I started working with Rob Buddy. That work became my first book, Flood Basement. And so there is a certain amount of overlap there. And then, of course, it was in 2006 that I properly started trying to write In Singing. He composed a song under the supervision of Rob Buddy. So there's quite a bit of continuity there, because I think that when you're writing in a university setting, to some degree, it's unavoidable to write to your professor as your audience. I don't know if other folks might have that experience at all, but that was super productive for me. So Rob is a really important listener to those two books as well, and they do talk to each other. And then my second book, Hidden City, was written later. It was written in 2013 when I was done my MA, and I was experiencing in an early and really important way the terrors of being a parent, and that so the psychological horror dimension, a lot of that comes from parenthood, and certainly I think parents here will relate to that. Yeah, so thank you for your question. I hope I actually got around to answering it somewhere in there.
No, thank you. And I'll definitely have to read those other two books as well. Looking forward to it.
I'd be thrilled. Thank you.
It's 7:52, so maybe we should start wrapping up. If anyone has any final questions, I will make sure Jeremy's happy to take them.
Yes, absolutely. Well, seeing none, I think perhaps I'll just take this opportunity to thank you all again for being here. Shazia, to thank you so much for your support and encouragement in this book, and also in this launch, which has been a real pleasure, and for sharing your work. Yeah, oh yes, and thank you, Greg. All the people who have made this book possible, and certainly Greg has some lovely words on the back cover, as does my redoubtable supervisor, John Shad, Naomi Lewis, who I've mentioned, everybody at the University of Calgary Press who has been incredible, and Rob Buddy, members of my MA committee, my partner, Aaron Arding Stewart, who actually painted the beautiful cover, and I definitely am gonna miss a lot of people, but I'll conclude by thanking June and Shelf Life Books for hosting this reading. It's been a great time, and yeah, I just really appreciate it a lot. Thank you all. Cheers.